The Atelier series has been going on for quite a while, with its first game coming out in the late 90s. It's always been a niche game with a small, loyal fan base. In 2019, we saw a new chapter in the series with Atelier Ryza. It ended up being the best-selling Atelier game ever for various reasons. While the character design certainly caught people's attention, and, a lot of success has been credited to that, it also had overhauled graphics and a relatively newcomer-friendly battle and crafting system, which all helped contribute to its success. But it still stuck to its tried-and-true formula by being a crafting and exploration-based JRPG with cute characters and a fairy tale-like atmosphere. In this video, we'll look at the sequel, Atelier Ryza 2: Lost Legends and the Secret Fairy, which is available for the Nintendo Switch, Sony PS4, and PS5, as well as the PC via Steam. Thankfully, Koei Tecmo provided me with the PS4 and PS5 versions of Ryza 2. Combining that with the Nintendo Switch limited edition that I bought myself, we'll be able to get a good overview of what the game is about and how it runs on various consoles. Of course, we'll look at the limited edition later too. The first Atelier Ryza was the first game of a new sub-series, so it was clear that there was going to be a sequel, but it's the first time since the PS2 games that we get a numbered sequel. In Atelier Ryza 2, Ryza is still the main protagonist, as you might imagine, and Claudia, Tao, and Lent return as playable characters as well. The game takes place 3 years after the events of Ryza. I don't really want to spoil anything from the first game, so I'm not going to discuss the story in any great detail, but we can talk some basics. The first game was themed around summer memories. Ryza and Co. wanted to go out and have adventures beyond what the little town had to offer. And throughout the game, you can see the characters grow and evolve from aimless youths to more purpose-driven young adults. Ryza 2 is quite similar, but of course the characters are 3 years older now and therefore are at a different chapter in their lives. Tao asks Ryza to help him in his research about some ruins he's been investigating. Ryza leaves her island of Kirken behind and meets him at the capital city of Ashra-am Bayard. There she meets both familiar faces as well as new characters, like Patty, a member of a wealthy family in the capital city, and Fee, a mysterious but friendly creature who is somehow tied to or related to the ruins. The time skip really emphasizes the character's evolution. A notable example is Tao, who not only is much taller now, but also has become more confident and less timid of a person. Because of things like that, it makes the experience of the first game feel a bit more special, like they've become precious memories. You realize that what you experienced in the first game could have only happened in that part of the characters' lives, and you'll never go back to those times again. That also makes Ryza 2 feel fresh in a new beginnings sort of way. What I just said ties perfectly with something I know many people are going to ask. Can you just skip Atelier Ryza 1 and go straight to the second game? Of course you can, technically speaking. Video games are always set up in a way that you can just jump in regardless if you've experienced, previous releases or not. But I reckon if you haven't played the first Ryza, just go play that. Like I said just now, the story in Ryza 2 has more depth if you already played the first game. You'll still get to know the characters somewhat if you haven't played Ryza 1, but you'll be missing out on an extra layer of enjoyment that you could be having if you played the first game and liked it. So that's the main reason to not skip Ryza 1. In terms of gameplay, you'll notice a lot of similarities with the previous game. The game is split up into various safe areas and dungeons. In dungeons, you'll be gathering items and exploring. You have tools which you can craft and use to gather items. For example, you start out with a staff. Later on, you'll make things like sickles and axes. Using a different tool on the same plant or rock, for example, may get you different items. While selecting the tool, you can see if another one will lead to another drop, which is very convenient. You also need certain tools to harvest certain items. There's also new ways to move around. You can now swim, dive, climb vines, and swing on ropes, for example. I guess Ryza learned how to swim between games. I like this edition though, it makes the world feel a little bit larger. When you come in contact with a monster, a battle will start, which seems pretty obvious. Battle is turn-based. You can see which characters are up next in the little timeline there. Though there's other gauges that show you the wait time for yourself and the enemies too. There's an AP system in regards to attacks and special attacks. I know some people don't like this sort of system, but as someone who prefers real-time gameplay most of the time, I think it's good, because it provides a bit of a real-time feel to a still inherently turn-based game. Speaking of real-time, it's possible to parry attacks by timing a button press correctly. My only complaint about this system is that if an enemy attacks just after you finish yours, there's a sort of dead spot where pressing defend doesn't do anything, and it's a bit annoying. You can switch between characters during the fight, though I usually just stick to Ryza for the most part. Your allies will ask you to do certain attacks, like they'll say, for example, deal physical or magical damage. Doing so will make them perform a special attack, so that's a good thing to do if you can. In addition to special attacks, there's also items. You can make offensive and defensive items, which can be allocated to each character. You don't consume the item, but rather using one will deplete a core charge. So if you exit the dungeon and come back, it'll be back to full. The core charge, that is. If you played the first Ryza game, you know that there is a tactic level system. It exists here too, but it works differently. Each battle you start out at level 1, but as you use special attacks, your tactics level will increase automatically, and your AP cap will rise, and the amount of AP you get increases too. There's a gauge on the bottom left telling you where you're at with that. I don't mind either system, but Ryza 2 is certainly a bit more fast-paced. And being able to use more and more special attacks as the battle goes on is certainly something I like too. That way things don't drag on and on and on. It's a bit more satisfying than having to manage AP between normal and special attacks all the time. There's stores in town if you need items. When running around town, you'll also meet people you can get side quests from. And there's also quests that you can get at the cafe. There's a board. Side quests can be requests for items or requests to deal with monsters. Some quests will also earn you positive reputation upon completion. Alchemy is a big part of the game, but it's not like you have to spend the entire game sitting in front of the cauldron. Most of the time I was exploring, gathering items, and fighting monsters. There's a new skill tree system in Ryza 2. As you do things like do quests, alchemy, and things like that, you earn SP. You can spend them to unlock recipes and related skills. Certain things are not unlockable even if you have the required SP. You'll need to fulfill some sort of criteria first, which is usually related to the main story. Speaking of SP, another way to earn it is through the exploration diary. Here you find clues with a magical compass. The clues are remnants of the past, so often they are part of a past memory or conversation. When you've gathered enough clues, you can open the exploration diary and solve the mysteries. Each fragment needs to go into the right slot, and when you do, you get SP. Though there's other uses for this game mechanic related to the main story also, like getting crafting recipes and things like that. In terms of difficulty, I do think that Ryza 2 is a bit easier than the previous game. In Ryza 1, I took a bit of a break at one point. Then I came back and changed the difficulty from normal to easy just because I'd forgotten how certain things work. Ryza 2 at normal difficulty feels a lot like the first game at easy. I don't even really use items during battle. Personally, I think they should have let the difficulty be as it was. I also noticed that I spent less time crafting and doing alchemy. I think with Ryza 2 they went towards a more explorative approach, which I think is okay. To me the game should be different to play after all. Let's talk about this game's look. Of course, we still have the same art style, with the main differences being character outfits, some characters being older, and some HUD and menu stuff. Speaking of character outfits, apparently in this universe having only one thigh high is completely normal, since some of the NPCs are following this trend as well. Also with Ryza, how did she manage to rip her shorts in this very specific area? It remains a mystery. In terms of graphics, Ryza 2 looks very similar to the first game, with similar performance as well. The game still has a Breath of the Wild inspired look. I think Ryza 2 looks pretty good. It doesn't look quite AAA because, well, it's made on a budget of course. Shaders, lighting, and a strong bloom effect are masking various graphical sins, but the overall look is pleasing. I have the Switch, PS4, and PS5 versions of the game. The Switch version is definitely the most compromised, with 30 FPS frame rates, lower resolution textures, shorter draw distances, and blocky shadows. But the most noticeable thing to me is a dithering effect in the shading that I've noticed on a few Switch games before too. The PS4 game looks more crisp and it lacks the weird dithering effect, though you'll notice that the shadows are still blocky. Performance seems to be about the same too, but keep in mind that I've only played the very early part of the game on those systems. There might be more of a difference in later places in the game. The PS5 version is the one I played the most, and it's interesting. The fact that it's in 4K is very noticeable. There's some instances on the Switch and PS4 versions where there's a lot of bloom on sunny days, and it's hard to make out, for example, ground details. The PS5 game looks much better, not because the bloom is less, but because it's in 4K, so the fine details show up as, fine pixels rather than being vague and blobby. The PS5 game also runs better. At times it does run at 60 FPS. Most consistently, it's when you're inside a building, but when you're out and about, you'll see the frame rate go up and down. Shadows are not blocky but sharp and crisp, so that's also a noticeable improvement. The PC version of the first game had also really good shadows, so presumably it's like that in Ryza 2 as well, on the PC version that is. One improvement Ryza 1 has over the first game is clearly visible when it rains. The reflection on the wet ground and how it looks on the various ground surfaces is pretty good. There's something about the environments that look better in Ryza 2. There's a DLC called Kirkin Island Adventures, which allows you to go back to certain Ryza 1 locations, and after playing the second game for a bit, returning to the old places just doesn't look as good, at least in certain spots. I think it's mainly down to the water. Since you can now swim and dive, you've got much more depth when looking into the water, whereas the first game's bodies of water were more like a blob of blue, which is ironic given the importance of water in the story in the first game. To me, the most disappointing thing about the graphics is the PS5 port. I really would have liked a 60 FPS experience with the PS5 version. I played the PC version of Ryza 1, and in comparison, the second game on the PS5 just doesn't feel as smooth. For a game like this, it should be smooth sailing throughout without any slowdowns. But as I said, this is a game built on a budget, so I'm not exactly surprised that they couldn't invest the time and money needed to properly optimize the port. I mean, even looking at AAA titles, there's some notable examples of sudden slowdowns and stuttering, which is particularly annoying when you're playing multiplayer. There's a couple more gameplay things you can fool around with, like photo mode. You can change a few things like poses, expressions, and the time of day. There's various outfits also, and there's also DLC where you can get a few more. The Atelier is also customizable, just like in Ryza 1, so, you can do like different flooring, different walls, and you can put items here and there. I always found the music to be a highlight in Atelier games, and I still do with Ryza 2. What I like about the soundtrack is that they don't have this, bombastic, over-the-top approach like some RPGs have. A lot of the exploratory music has a more whimsical quality with playful and positive flourishes here and there. It's very much in line with the fairy tale or storybook feel that the Atelier games have. Of course, there's a lot of music for all kinds of different situations too, and it's all used in appropriate moments. Overall, a refreshing departure from other games. Let's have a look at the limited edition, as I think it's quite nice. Here it is. It was available through the Nisa online store. They handled the LEs despite Koei Tecmo being the publisher. In case you don't know, NIS America was the previous publisher, so I think that's why a relationship with the franchise is still being maintained. Unlike the previous game, which was more boxy, this time around the LE box is tall, wide, and slim. In fact, it looks like the old Nisa LEs from around, 10-ish years ago, just bigger. There's a lot of construction similarities, except it doesn't have that flap that annoyed so many people. I really like the colors and the artwork on the box. Ryza is looking very determined there on the cover. I like how the turquoise design frames the image. It looks a bit like a picture book or a fairy tale. Just so you know, green and also greenish turquoise was quite popular in Victorian times. So the color kind of helps in that regard, when it comes to establishing some sort of visual mood. The back image is great too, and unfortunately it's a bit spoiled by these tabs protruding from the side, so it's not as displayable as the other side is. Inside we have a game and also a little acrylic chain, or a keychain that is. This is obviously the Switch version, but the LE was available in a PS4 format as well. The game case has some nice illustrations that serve as a background. The game cartridge is there too, so that's good. Unfortunately, there's no manual, just a piece of paper with a link to an online manual. The online manual is quite good though, and you can check it out even if you don't have the game by just doing a quick search. Behind the game, there's a code for an outfit. After taking out the dividers, there's 2 clear files. There's a B2 size cloth poster. This has an illustration of the main characters as well as Fee. Lastly, there's an art book which has some fake binding going on. Unfortunately, it's not translated. I would have liked to be able to read some of the notes, but no. Despite looking very good and well packaged, this LE does come across as a little bit lazy. They just took some Japanese merch and put that in, which is normally okay, but the art book should really have been translated. It's a shame because it has a cool scrapbook theme and it's very nice to look at. Just having the notes be in English would have elevated the experience quite a bit. I like knowing about the design process. As items to look at, they do still look good though, so it's a nice set of things to display. That's partly due to the fact that for the most part they managed to avoid using the same illustration over and over again, which is something that plagues some other limited editions. So that's Atelier Ryza 2. Overall, I enjoyed it. I like the shift towards a more exploration-based experience, though I do think we don't need to go that direction anymore because, we don't want to lose the alchemy part of it. I like the new mechanics like swimming. It makes exploration a bit more fun. I like being able to follow this cast of characters. I really liked them in the first game and I enjoyed them going through the adventures that are present in the second game. I think the main criticism on my end is that the game has become a little bit too easy. Whatever normal is should just have been easy mode. And the PS5 version seems like a missed opportunity to utilize the hardware properly. Not in terms of graphics per se, but more importantly performance. That really should have run at a more consistent frame rate. And if you're a newcomer to the Atelier series, or specifically the Ryza games, then you might not enjoy the story as much given that you'll be unaware of the characters' backstories and previous adventures. And honestly, I think the story carries the game, especially during some of the technically not so great parts of the gameplay. So if you're in that situation, check out Atelier Ryza 1 instead. Thank you everyone who supports the channel. You'll see some tier 3 Patreon supporters on your screen now. You can become a supporter too by going to patreon.com/ysn, watch videos before they come out on YouTube, and get behind the scenes updates on what I'm working on. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again in the next video.